Could there be something that's available right now that's better than any retinoid on the market? And could retinoids then someday be a thing of the past? To find out more, stay tuned. This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective. Hello out there, all you skin scientists. I am Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and welcome back to the Skin Science Podcast. And with me in the studio today, we have, as always, or most of the time, the lovely Angela Wilson McDonald. How are you, Angela?
I'm great. How are you, Thomas?
I'm great, and she is in a different position today.
I am.
And that's because we have a special guest, the lovely Dr. Jigna Patel. How are you, Dr. Patel?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
And you are coming all the way from?
London, in the United Kingdom.
Okay, well, actually, you came from McKinney, Texas.
By way of McKinney.
By way of McKinney.
No, she's here visiting family who some of them live in McKinney. Please don't, I'm not doxing her. I'm not doxing your family. No, I'm just kidding. But for those of you who may remember, Jigna, Dr. Patel was on an episode. Has it aired yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You haven't watched it?
Well, they do them out of order.
Okay.
So some of them that are airing now have like long curly hair, and then it's like all of a sudden it's changed. So, but anyway, she was here last year via satellite. And so she was going to be here visiting family. So we thought, let's get her in the studio and have some really fun, discussions about what we're going to talk about today, which is about retinoids and microbiota and whether or not there's some crosstalk between those two topics. But for those of you who don't remember, Dr. Patel attained her bachelor's degree in human anatomy and cell biology in 2003 and thereafter gained her medical degree with distinctions from King's College, London School of Medicine in 2008. She began her career in pediatrics before moving into general practice with special interests in dermatology, child and mental health. Her areas of interest in aesthetic medicine include skin health and the skin microbiome, regenerative medicine, and holistic well-being. And then through an entire being approach, she connects the mind, body, and skin to alleviate her patient care. Elevate her patient care. We don't want to alleviate their care, elevate. But thank you so much for being here, Jigna. It's a pleasure. I will say, we were introduced to Dr. Patel, was it last year?
Yes,
it was last year. It's been a whirlwind the last couple of years.
Yes, it was last year in October. I am the one who comes to a launch of a particular range, having read your lovely book. Probably the only one in the audience who's done that twice. And realised at that point that this was me. And that I could see things and connect medicine and aesthetics and cell biology and holistic well-being. And I just was captivated, I would say, and just felt like this was my area of aesthetic medicine that I really wanted to drive and push. But actually, I think what really hooked me was the fact that it made me think about the way I practice, made me really question how and what we've been told in terms of what we can offer patients. And then it made me go back to the books, which is not...
Books meaning the medical literature.
Yes, medical literature, but it made me question everything.
That's wonderful.
Which I'm quite happy to do, and I think if we're going to progress in aesthetic medicine, we need to be able to evolve and adapt to new concepts and new ways without being frightened of it.
Absolutely. So for all of you who may not remember, she's referring to this book, which is Rebooting the Biome. Oh, you can't see that. The lights are shining. That's real glossy. There you go. Rebooting the Biome, which is a book that I co-authored with Dr. Doris Day. And really, the crux of the book surrounds through a philosophy. So it's a philosophy of how we not just care for the skin, but holistically for what we call holobiont. I call that philosophy of holobiontology. And I think Dr. Patel has actually started to use that term, which is for me, both fascinating and awesome, because I don't believe that I'm the only person in the world that believes that. It's just I put a name to it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that ascribe to that, where it's, I guess, it could also be called holistic, but that's kind of gotten a bad stigma, that holistic word.
I guess it has, but then I think the tables are turning.
Are they? Okay.
Holistic, I think, originally was all alternative practice. A lot of people went down the kind of anti-drug, anti-medicine, and I understand that. But I think the tables are starting to turn.
Because there's something to that. Just people took it a little too far, maybe.
Yes.
And so and that's the thing is, even with aesthetic medicine, there's pseudoscience in there.
Yep.
We don't like to think that, but there is. And that's part of what we do on the Skin Science podcast is we try to see if we can look at things from different angles to kind of tease out what is marketing, which sometimes can be pseudoscience. And it's not that marketing is bad. It's just that sometimes it leads people to believe something that isn't quite true or makes it reductive. And we can't always have everybody speaking at the level of PhDs or MDs because not everybody has the time to get that level of education. But there's some certain fundamental truths, even within aesthetic medicine, where we have to be honest with ourselves. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. And so, Angela.
Yes, sir.
What do you know about retinoids?
What do I know about retinoids? So retinoids have been around for roughly 30 years.
They've been used, I guess.
Used.
Not around.
Excuse me. Used. I'm thinking specifically of aesthetic medicine as well. So I'm thinking more of aesthetic medicine. Where I see them most commonly used is to fight the visible signs of aging, for the treatment of acne. I think the biggest concern of retinols, what you see is a lack of compliance with them because they're not well tolerated. So there's a subset of patients that never take advantage of this molecule because they simply can't tolerate it. That's redness, dryness, flakiness, irritation, or they're simply not willing to go through that period of time that can be 6 to 8 weeks when their skin is supposed to adjust to it. Not everybody's willing to go through that.
Right.
So I think in general, that's kind of what, is known about retinol in aesthetic medicine.
Okay. Well, there was a word that you used, and because we here at the Skin Science podcast, definitions matter, right? And so we try our best to make sure. So you used both retinoid and retinol. So Jigna, could you educate us on what those two terms mean and how they relate to each other?
So retinoids are a family of molecules, but the actual... I guess if you want to get geeky about this, there is a retinoid pathway, and you have various steps to convert to get to the most active form of retinoid, which is retinoic acid. And yes, there's elements at each step of that process where people can have problems tolerating that particular ingredient. But typically, we're going from sort of milder acting forms up to being quite potent and strong, and then to prescription medications, which are not available over the counter. So when it comes to trying to decide which retinoid you want to use, it really does come down to consultation, what you're trying to deal with. And as you quite rightly said, Angela, the main issues really is trying to acclimatize and to adjust to using such a potent active. But it may not be suitable for everyone. And I think the biggest issue that we're seeing, and I will bring in some new EU legislation if you don't mind, because I think we need to talk about this.
Sure.
So the biggest issue is people assuming they can tolerate everything, or the polar opposite, which is the fear of even going near a retinoid because of the side effects. But I think the main issue that we're going to start seeing is because we're over exfoliating, we're over cleansing, people are either being misguided or thinking that they can learn off social media to cope with those issues by lapping on other products and then confusing the skin, sensitizing the skin, leading to further problems. And because of this overall concern, and also because being exposed to vitamin A, has got issues. I have to just clarify, I'm British, so I'm going to say vitamin.
Vitamin's fine.
Vitamin's
Aluminium.
fine, right? So brands now have got about 3 years to formulate their products because EU legislation is now going to restrict what percentage of retinol we can use in over-the-counter products.
Okay, let's just make sure everybody gets that, that the EU's just passed legislation and they're giving companies a few years to catch up because it takes a while to get all that sorted. But why did they do that?
Well, because there's all this concern about too much exposure to vitamin A. And actually, it makes sense, and the side effects as well, because it's quite worrying. You can go on Google And you can shop for potent retinoids, not the prescription ones, potent ones, and have no idea how to use them, how often to use them, why you're using them, and it's causing problems.
And what are some of the safety concerns about retinoids?
Well,
because I know that there's some birth issues with
it.
Yep.
So doing studies in pregnant and breastfeeding women is unethical. So by default, so many ingredients can't be used in pregnancy and breastfeeding. So you kind of caution and move away. But exposure to vitamin A can cause something called teratogenicity, so you can get limb defects. So we want to try and stay away from potent actives like this. And that's a really difficult time for women, especially if they're in pregnancy, because things can get worse, can get better, can be unchanged. So I think putting that to one side, if you've gone as far as now having to reformulate products, there's clearly a major issue here. And I think for companies out there, they're going to have a big problem when they're trying to downgrade their percentages and then having to reformulate, because what kind of problems is that going to then bring with it? And then we have to think, well, are there other ways to circumvent that?
Yeah. Do you need it?
Do you need it?
I mean, that's
another question.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think, it's not, the word is not dogma, but it's one of the kind of things that we kind of in our zeitgeist in our society today in medicine, in aesthetic medicine and skincare, people just believe it's a fundamental part of caring for your skin is application of a retinoid of some sort. And it's funny because you mentioned how there's that chain where basically the body has to break it up, metabolize it into retinoic acid. It can't use it in a form that's... No. So what do you call them? An ester, then a retinoid. So any of the retinoids other than retinoic acid really can activate these receptors, which is how the retinoic acid actually makes change, makes the body actually use it. Now, keep in mind, everyone, the body needs vitamin A. It's, as she said, a vitamin. It is something that we need. It's an oil-soluble vitamin, and we need it to live. But here's the thing is that we've said many times, dosage matters, and so where's the line? Because, you have people saying, we have high levels of vitamin A that you put on topically. Now, of course, topical is different than systemic ingestion. Sure. So there's a little bit of kind of nebulous kind of thought around how much is too much. Where's the line that we cross where now we're becoming less healthy? Is it really, if our body really wants that level of vitamin A on the skin, why does it react the way it does? Why is this all happening? And should we think of that as a healthy thing to do? Like to put your body through something that it doesn't want and then it gets used to because it has to, is that really a good thing? Yeah. Where's the evidence? Now, a lot of it's going to be in what you said, which is, I don't know how you put it, but something about reversing the signs of aging. You said in a much more
changing the visible signs of aging.
Visible signs of aging, which is really the cosmetic way of saying you're helping your skin look younger, right?
Yes.
And it's just that a lot of companies have to use certain marketing language to get around structure function claims. That being said, let me ask you all this. What are some of the things that retinoids help with? Let's list out the things that retinoids help with. Angela?
Cell turnover.
Okay, cell turnover, so desquamation.
So for the consumers listening, just helping the skin to be softer and smoother because you're removing the dead skin cells that much quicker.
Which is why we do exfoliation, and that can be done either mechanically or enzymatically, or arguably doesn't need to be really done either way. I personally just use, if I want to exfoliate, I just dry my face off after a shower, and that exfoliates enough for me. With something else.
So reduced oil production.
Reduced oil production. And so that's an interesting one as well. So let's put a pin in that. So Abigail, can you write all these down just to make sure we don't miss any of these when we get into the next part of this topic? Anything else?
Skin discolorations.
Okay. Both ways, hypo and hyper, or just?
Reducing hyperpigmentation.
Okay.
So it's a natural tyrosinase inhibitor. Not a natural tyrosinase inhibitor.
I'm not sure it's that way, but yes, it does help with dyschromias.
Yeah. So shedding of your stratum corneum, so to thin it out, so the exfoliation.
Kind of that. Fine lines and wrinkles is kind of one that most people immediately think of.
Yeah.
I've heard also that it actually causes more blood flow therefore it gives people more of a rosy appearance.
If you've got rosacea, like I do.
And so, all right, so all those things being said, okay, why are all of those things that are inevitable? Because they're aging, right? They're signs of aging, like you said.
Right.
Pigmentation issues can be more exacerbated for some than others, but we're all going to get some fine lines and wrinkles. There are a few lucky ones that don't really get a lot of those. But those other things that you mentioned, what about the cell turnover? Does that stop as we age?
Slows down as we age.
Okay. And is there a reason why that we know of physiologically that?
So if you're referring to cell senescence, so there's going to be a point where your cells, a number of divisions will stop inevitably. So it's about 50 to 60 times for a keratinocyte, I believe.
Right.
And that is essentially where a cell goes into arrest. And it has to do that at some point. You can't keep turning over and turning over. There is a limit.
Okay. Well, then how does a retinoid, if there's a limit, how does a retinoid get past that?
Well, that's the tricky thing, isn't it? So, and that's where I think the problems start lying, because I'm now thinking back as to when I was educated about cell turnover. There was this huge push to increase and stimulate cell turnover to keep you looking young. And I didn't make the connection and dots to think, well, why would we want to accelerate that process to get to a limit sooner? What are we then going to do? How does our body cope with that?
Mm-hmm.
Surely then we just invite aging to start happening sooner. So when you've talked about whether we need to use them at all, arguably, if you think about it at a cellular level, if you are not pushing that cell turnover, you have more divisions left to go before you put a cell into cell cycle arrest. Right.
That's it. That's the presupposition there, is that you have less stem cells, right? Because stem cells, in theory, can divide endlessly. Yeah. Now, the problem is that it's pretty well known that as we chronologically age, we have less stem cells available. And if you have less stem cells to make adult cells, then it becomes more critical that you don't really accelerate the division of the adult cell necessarily, because you have less stem cells to take over. So the real question is, and I'm not sure if this has been well studied, I could be wrong, but if anybody knows that's listening, feel free to write in and let us know. But has anybody taken a look at whether, when you're forcing cells that don't want to go past the Hayflick limit, if they have nothing to, because the body's not going to let your skin just fall off because there's no more stem cells, right? It's going to find a way to produce skin, because that's one of the inherent ways in which our body is protected. So how does that work? Where's the line? Is there something that happens when you push it too far? I think it's not necessarily elucidated at this point, but it's an interesting premise, right? So what is happening here, long-term use, especially of aggressive levels? And I think that's why the European Union, probably, I guess the UK is not part of that anymore, so how does that work?
Yeah, very good question. But I think we've all been told about it, and I think I know 3 years seems like a long time, but it's not at all. And I have a feeling as we evolve more into this holistic approach, I hazard a guess that we're going to start probably being less proactive with actives, because now we are expanding the horizon and other things are coming along,
right, which
supersede, in my opinion,
right,
these active molecules, but also respect what's happening at the surface of the skin, which, if we think about how we're educated as a clinician, as an aesthetic physician, nobody talked about that. It was like, just power on, use your actives. You'll get that flawless, and I never use that term, flawless, clean, glass skin. And that is so toxic, that term, because nobody has that.
Right.
And use as potent and active as you can, but with caution. So the whole message has been confused from day one.
Right.
And I just find that we're going to run into this gray area of thinking, have we been doing it all wrong to start with? Not necessarily all wrong, but I think people are now starting to wake up and realize that actually we don't have to be so aggressive.
Right. Let your body do the talking sometimes rather than forcing it.
Also nurture and balance what's on the surface, which
and
isn't entirely
don't
new.
break
Don't break what's not broken.
What's not broken, right? And I think that's one of the things. Like I tell people this story when I lecture all the time of when I was hitting puberty, and I had, other than scars from like pox and like when my cat attacked me, whole other story. But other than that, I had flawless skin. I never had acne, not a pimple, nothing. And I saw my sister like getting all these fancy creams, what I thought was fancy was actually like St. Ives and all that stuff, which is not fancy. But I saw her getting all this stuff, and I was jealous. So I begged my stepmom if I could have stuff too, and she got me witch hazel, which immediately dried out my skin. And then all of a sudden, I started getting acne, and then I started getting acne scars and stuff. And now, could there be some coincidence that's when my body just was primed to start getting acne? Maybe, but it wasn't until I started messing with my skin, which I didn't really wash my face with any cleansers or anything. I would just get in the shower with soap, and I didn't wash my face usually at all because boys don't really do a lot of that. Maybe in today's world they do, but back then it was just shower and then go to school, whatever. So I messed with it, and I guess the reason why I bring that up is because it is my feeling, and that's part of the rebooting the biome kind of philosophy of holobiontology, is that by over cleansing the skin, we are actually causing physiological changes to the skin and how the skin reacts to certain things. We're actually also causing dysbiosis of the skin, not just by cleansing, but by all the products that we use, put on, not just topically, but what we ingest as well. And so it's important that we note that ask, is it part of the reason why we are aging the way we are of our skin and our bodies because of the modern way of life? The extreme use of preservative systems, both in our food sources as well as our topicals, the over cleansing of not just our skin, but our surroundings as well. Like, especially after COVID, everybody's wiping down everything with bleach. Yeah.
They still are.
And so is that really the best thing for us? And I go back to some of the research we did for rebooting the biome, which is looking at the association of people that live in more dirty areas, like rural people who are working on farms and stuff, tend to have less instance of skin issues and asthma and such than people that are in urban or more affluent people, or affluent. I always forget how to say that word. But people that have more money and tend to live in more hermetically sealed, if you will, places, or more clean places, tend to have more instance of skin issues and things like asthma, inflammatory diseases. And so that's where that whole idea comes back to, is, have we broken something by our habitual sanitation and grooming habits that now needs to be repaired by these retinoids? What's your feeling on that, Angela?
Have we broken something that needs to be repaired? I don't think the public generally looks at it that way. I think it's more of, it's a buzz. I mean, we see, especially in our industry, something comes up and you're made to feel that if you're not using retinol,
you're doing it wrong. You're going to look bad.
It's not going to go well for you. You're really made to feel that. There's many times over the years that I've questioned that, but I'm also a rosacea sufferer. So it's just not something that I ever tolerated, nor maybe if I was willing to do the 6 to 8 weeks of walking through it, maybe I would have eventually. But then I have to ask myself the question, if it takes me that long to get used to it, am I really supposed to be using it?
Right.
So I don't know if it was something that was, I think it's more of something that, again, it was just the idea that if you want to look good long term, then you should be doing this.
Right.
Now, it's interesting just working with, dermatologists now, and I walked into a practice to discuss some of our products, and I asked the first dermatologist, what percentage of your patients on retinol? She said, all of them.
I've heard that. Some people say that as well.
And now when I started questioning her a little further, it came down to 70%, and then half of those really couldn't tolerate it, so they weren't using it every day. Next dermatologist comes in, her partner, and I said, what percentage of your patients on retinol? She said, none. I walked away from retinol years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't say that for the treatment of something she may not still be using it, but we were talking aesthetically. She said none. So it's interesting how two practicing dermatologists can practice together, yet have very different views on retinol for aesthetic purposes.
Right. And now one caveat that I meant to say at the beginning that I'm going to say now is I don't want the listening audience to think that we are disparaging the molecule or the family of molecules of retinol. We are not. I firmly believe there's a place in medicine, whether aesthetic medicine or otherwise, for this. But it's as I've said before, is that it's not about saying that the tool or what we're doing is wrong. It's that we now know better. And when you know better, you can do better, meaning we might use the same tool, but we use it in a different way. We use it in a better way. Because we then have other tools that might help us to do things in a better way, which is really, we've set it up to discuss potentially what these other tools could be. And so...
Well, I think it just goes back to progression. For some reason in technology, we accept progression. We know we're going to get a new version of our iPhone soon. TVs are going to get better. Cars are going to better. We accept that. But for some reason, I feel like when it comes to skin science, we're supposed to stick to what we did 20 or 30 years ago. We don't readily think of the fact that science is always progressing. That includes skin science. And when faced with the opportunity to do something different based on what the science is telling us, are we willing to make those changes?
Well, I think a lot of it is driven by industry, right? If you look at it from an industry perspective, it costs a lot of money to bring something truly innovative to the market. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of risk because, and I actually was reading something. What was I reading the other day about this? I think, it had to do with biotech startups and how there's a lot less money going in right now to biotech startups than during the pandemic. There was like this big boom and it's going back down. It's actually the lowest amount of venture capital is going into biotech startups for the last 8 years. And some of the question was talking about, well, why is this? And they were talking about how, basically there's like this kind of, this what do they call it? A premise or something? Not a premise, but a guidebook or something for startups and what makes a successful biotech startup. And one of them talks about the technical founders, and that a lot of times when the technical founder is wrapped up in the equity of a company, it inhibits them from asking the hard questions because they're afraid if they ask them, it might get a negative answer and then it kills it, right? And I think that's the risk you take to do something in a legitimate fashion is you have to ask the hard questions, try to poke all the holes in it, because if you don't, somebody else is going to. It's one of the very things that, I've gotten in a lot of water. It wouldn't be the Skin Science podcast with me in it if I didn't stir the pot a little bit, right? And so like with exosomes, I stir the pot not because I'm trying to cause trouble, but I'm trying to say somebody's got to poke holes in this before it passes muster for us to actually take it to a legitimate level.
But other people are already concerned, right?
Right.
So molecular biologists, oncologists, cell biologists, they're all bringing it up now at conferences, and as we've been in Paris, and I think we have to be honest with ourselves. The amount of companies that, I know we're not talking about this topic, but the amount of companies who jump on this bandwagon and have just literally gone full steam ahead. Yes, there's potential. Yeah. Of course there's potential.
Right.
But we're going way too fast with that topic. And I think there's a lot of work still to be done. And hopefully that positive information will come out. But just as you highlighted the other day, there are already problems with skin necrosis. There are already issues with not knowing, does it potentially activate biomarkers on cancer cells? Like we just don't know. And I think that is probably going to be a big one to tackle out of everything, more so than probably what we're talking about. But it does make the right people will stand back and reassess.
Right. And so for those who are not familiar, I posted on my Instagram a paper that I read about injection of exosomes, and I'm using that in a generic term, which you should not do, but that's what they call it, exosomes out of Korea. And I was looking for, I think I might have missed the brand name or the company, because it's important, what the actual exosome is from, and because they're all different. And the reason I bring that up, and so anyways, you can check out my Instagram if you want to see that paper so you can read it for yourself. And it's a few case studies. It's not definitive or conclusive, but it shows why we need to be careful. But the reason I bring that up is because, again, we have to ask ourselves the hard questions, but we be willing to pivot when the time comes. But the thing is, if a company has gone all in on a certain, whether it's retinoids or exosomes or whatever, when they've gone all in, it's hard for them to actually back up. So one thing I'll bring up that Angela our historian can
collaborate,
attribute to, is we're selling a vitamin A product for several years. And, it was mostly on the premise of, well, you guys are going to use it anyway, so let's make sure that it doesn't disrupt the microneedling process. Let's formulate it so that it actually, and so, you know, some people that know us over the last decade or so might say, well, then why were you selling me that? If now you're talking about, you know, being so careful with retinoids. Well, part of it is what we just said, which is we know better, so we're doing better, right? And so there's a certain place where you're like, okay, well, this is where the market is, so let's try to make the best out of what we got. Let's try to make sure that if they're going to do this, they do it with the safest, best possible product. And so you have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, you could say the same thing about our technology as well. There was a time in our history where skin pen.
Okay.
We used, you know, that we sourced from Korea, our first generation pen. When we finally built our own pen in the U.S., engineered and manufactured to become the first FDA cleared, and we took it in practice for the first time, literally I had some of our customers say, it feels like we're microneedling correctly for the first time. We didn't know better. We didn't know at the time that we weren't, that there was a better way to do it.
We knew that we needed to improve.
We knew we needed to improve. Right. And, but, you know, it wasn't until we started using that device that we could see the difference. We could feel the difference. We could see the reaction in the skin. We could see the comfort level. Everything was coming into play that it was like, you know, we didn't know better at the time. We built a business, our customers built a business, and there were a lot of happy patients with that old technology. But when you had an opportunity to do it better and could see the effect that then had on those same practices and those same patients, it was the trajectory of business skyrocketed. Right. It was just simply a better process. And so
now we have a better tool.
Now we have a better tool.
And so we change, you know, we're going to evolve based on where the science and the medicine takes us. And that's where I want to kind of switch to the you know, other end of the topic here, which is we have now also started to get away from retinoids as a company. We do still have brands like Strivectin who has retinoids in them, Status Quo Skincare. But from the aesthetics perspective, we have gone to the holobiotology kind of philosophy for medical aesthetics, which basically then also almost fell into that trap where initially we were thinking because everybody was using retinoids, we would put the retinoids into our Xycrobe technology products in the BioJuice line of products. And we very quickly pulled back from that because we saw it was not conducive to skin health. And actually, that's where we'll get into a little bit more technical detail in a second. But before we do, though, I'd forgotten all about the puzzle for today. Where's my camera?
Let's pull back and talk
so
about
I want to show you.
I can't believe we got through half an episode and you haven't started on your puzzle.
Well, this is a puzzle by a very well-known puzzle creator that makes very expensive puzzles, so I only have one of his. This one is actually not that expensive because I got it through an auction site, but this is called Smack'em Moles, and it's by a guy that calls himself Stickman. And he, you can see this little symbol down there. I'm not sure if that's visible. It's probably too light on there. But basically, it's not what you think. It looks like the goal of this puzzle is to like use this mallet to whack these moles, but actually, it's a sequential discovery puzzle. And I'll leave it at that for now. It actually became a lot more fun when you figured out what we were supposed to do with it. But anyway, moving on.
Very nice. Okay.
To the topic.
Commercial break.
Oh, I also want to show you something else. So Dr. Patel's, is it niece?
Yes.
Her niece found out she was coming on to the podcast today. And so she decided to draw some wonderful pieces of art that's probably going to auction for millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Except for she shouldn't have put my name on it. Now it's going to probably drive the value down.
Clearly.
But she saw on my Instagram a story of my beagle Tyke who was eating carrots in order to teach everybody that microbiome of your gut is important and eating vegetables helps with the biome of the gut. And so she drew this picture here, which says, "Hi, Tykers and Dr. Thomas, eat your veggies." Look at that. Now, Tyke doesn't really have a tongue coming out of his nose, but other than that, it is spot on. I mean, I looked at that and I was like, Tyke, how'd you get here? So then she also drew a picture of Captain Xycrobe. I don't know if everybody's listening. There you go. That's better. I don't know if you guys know who Captain Xycrobe is because Captain Xycrobe was the mascot of Xycrobe Therapeutics before sale to Crown. And we actually had a plushie made of Captain Xycrobe. So you can actually, if you Google Captain Xycrobe, you'll find like there's this little plushie. We started an Instagram account. I don't have control over it anymore. I don't know how actually to log in, but he was like traveling the world and lecturing and stuff. It was pretty funny. But anyway, she saw that, and I'm who's this? Is that me?
No, that's her. She has to be present.
Self-portrait.
So I love wonderful rainbow
she made
skirt.
a point of featuring.
I mean, she's got some eyebrows. I mean, look at those eyebrows. I don't know if you can zoom in on that, but I got to see this young lady in person because I want to congratulate her on growing such robust eyebrows. Anyway,
it wasn't the retinoids.
Anyways, thank you so much, young lady. Those were wonderful pieces of art. I'm going to cherish them. And so moving on to the topic at hand, which is, okay, we've laid the foundation of what retinoids are, what they do, kind of why they've been kind of growing in aesthetic medicine to where we're at a place in our history where it's basically, as Angela said, assumed that if you're not doing retinoids, you're not doing skincare. And I've heard people say like FACE, like if you're not using those vitamins, then you're not really taking care of your skin. And so I have a very different take, and it's because of the research that I've been doing on the skin microbiome over the last decade. And so for those of you who may not know, I started a company named Xycrobe Therapeutics, and we were looking at basically using microbes from the skin, commensal microbes from the skin, genetically manipulating them so that they would spit out biologics. And it was initially meant for inflammatory skin diseases like acne and rosacea, and actually psoriasis was our initial indication we were looking for, and then also atopic dermatitis. And we were very successful. What we noted was that we were doing the experiments to look at just the vehicle, so just the microbe that we chose alone. We saw that it was actually doing something that was unanticipated. So we chose to use C. acnes, which is Cutibacterium acnes, formerly known as Propionibacterium acnes. And we chose that because Dr. Lee at UCLA, who's a scientist that I very much respect, did research on Propionibacterium acnes species or strains within the skin. And what she showed basically blew the lid off of about 50 years of scientific research, where people have done a lot of tests calling C. acnes or P. acnes a pathogen. And the reason that was changed was because we noticed that they had used one or two different strains, but she was showing that there was dozens, if not hundreds, of these strains that are out there that differ amongst people, and they have different associations, whether they have acneic skin or normal skin. And so that got us looking, because when we got our results, looking at C. acnes, the strain that we had, which was a ribotype 6, which is now classified under C. acnes defendens, which is one of the 3 distinct subspecies of C. acnes. The defendant subspecies does not have an association with acne, so therefore should not be considered pathogenic. However, what we observed was that it actually reduced inflammation in the cell cultures. It didn't cause inflammation, which is what the medical literature said it should do. And then we further went on to find, and there's a paper that Abigail actually brought out, which was something that was a pretty landmark paper for me in 2017, where it showed that the species itself had a gene that was only in the C. acnes species that actually was extremely antioxidant, just as potent as vitamin C. But the thing is, because it is a living biological organism that's engrafted into skin, it's constantly secreting this to protect itself. So it's a serendipitous thing. It's not doing it because it likes us. It's doing it because it's an antioxidant and it doesn't like oxygen, so it's protecting itself by decorating its house with these molecules. And we've also found that we've identified at least 1 or 2 other antioxidants that this species and subspecies secretes along with it. And then we went on to find a couple of other things. Is that specific strains of C. acnes actually do some very interesting things, which is going to be really the crux of our discussion today. One is that it's not well known, but it's been documented that C. acnes and some strains of Staphylococcus epidermidis can actually activate the AHR receptor. Now, the AHR receptor is something that has to do with cell differentiation and proliferation, and it actually is one of the reasons why C. acnes has been seen as at least the strain that was studied in a specific paper when they killed it with formalin, which is basically a way to kill it so that it's still intact, but it's not metabolizing. They found that it actually caused sebaceous sebocytes, the cells that make up the sebaceous gland, to reduce the amount of lipids that they were creating. And so it goes back to the study that we saw originally in our BioJuve study where we saw a reduction in sebaceous secretions. We thought it was because simply they were eating the sebaceous secretions and metabolizing them. It was both. It's doing that, of course, but also the sebocytes are regulated. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to pull up.
So they're regulated, meaning they're not overproducing. They're producing
Right.
at normal levels. So it's not stopping the production because you said retinols stop the production. So
No, they don't stop. Retinoids don't stop the production. They dysregulate it as well.
they dysregulate as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the one thing, let's see if I can find it really quick, because I pulled up the paper and I thought it was an interesting dichotomy of what they said. See if I can find it. Here it is. Okay, so this is the paper that is called Formalin-Killed Propionibacterium acnes Activates the Aryl Hydrocarbon Receptor, AHR receptor, and modifies differentiation of SZ95 sebocytes in vitro. So, of course, again, this is a specific strain of P. acnes. They didn't use all thousands of strains. They used one specific strain. They killed it, and they used one strain of sebocytes. But their conclusion was that formalin-killed P. acnes inhibits lipogenesis and induces terminal differentiation of sebocytes into keratinocyte-like cells via activation of the AHR pathway in vitro, suggesting that follicular P. acnes is not only acneogenic, but also promotes acne remission through feedback regulation and semen production. That threw me for a loop when I read it.
Well, I don't even know what you just said.
Well, the last part's the most important, which is confusing because it says it suggests that the C. acnes that lives in the follicles are acnogenic, causes acne, but then they say, but also it promotes the remission of acne. So what is that about?
It's mundane, and my brain is trying to work this one out.
Well,
It's so complicated.
It is, and I think part of it's because they don't know. I think everybody's been so ingrained with C. acnes causes acne.
Because
they're-
they've been fixated on the studies that reflect the
Exactly.
pathogenic.
So I think the problem is
Phenotype.
that they're now having to say, okay, I'm going to not rock the boat and stick with the dogma of the last 50 years. But what I'm observing is that actually C. acnes can help to alleviate this source of acnogenesis. And so I think that was super interesting because the AHR receptor is one of those things where, it could, anything that you do too much of is going to be not necessarily good. Too much oxygen will kill you.
Yeah.
It's why, one of those things where it's like these what do you call them? CO2 masks and stuff. I get the idea, but they're using them all the time. And the fact is, when you put a bunch of oxygen on the surface of the skin, that's not necessarily a good thing because oxygen is a free radical and it's going to cause oxidative damage. So while a little bit can be okay, a lot is not necessarily great. Too much water can flush your electrolytes out and kill you. And so you don't want to, there's that famous story of the woman who, I don't know if you guys remember, where she was on a radio show and she was trying to win a game console for her son or something. And they made her hold her pee and drink gallons of water, and she died. And so I don't know what happened with it. I'm sure they were sued in some way, but regardless, the fact is, in medicine, dosage matters. We've said it many times. So even with healthy things, dosage matters. So one of the things that got me really thinking about how we could use the commensal microbes of the skin for better health, not just the skin, but the gut as well, and there's other companies looking at the gut for the same idea, is that because there's that feedback loop. It's even mentioned here. It says it's through a feedback regulation. There's a feedback loop where you can never overdose with these molecules that these microbes are producing because they can only produce molecules based on the food sources that your body gives them. So if they regulate the food source and then the food source regulates the microbes, there's a loop of feedback that basically is why we call it symbiosis, because it can't overdo it. So there's no too much of this and too much of that. It's basically built in, this regulation. And so you have this ROX-P molecule, these antioxidants that are being secreted, and it's being regulated by that cycle. But the problem is that when we use a bunch of stuff that kills off these microbes, and we get dysbiosis, it breaks that cycle. Mm-hmm. So now we don't have whatever is causing this AHR receptor to be activated. It's dysregulated. So if we do something like use too much moisturizer and it causes what's something that causes more oil production? I'm drawing a blank. Regardless, when we modulate our oil production and we cause our body to change, it changes the amount of microbes that are there, which changes the amount of instigation of more lipids. Because if you don't have this mitigation of lipids because of the C. acnes, because you've killed the C. acnes, then you're going to cause more, which is going to actually cause other things to grow, cause dysbiosis. And there's other molecules that they'll produce, like for instance, when you have very little C. acnes, it's associated with larger amounts of Staphylococcus growth. And larger amounts of Staphylococcus growth is typically associated with higher pH. And Staphylococcus epidermidis secretes proteases that actually over-desquame the skin. And so basically you have this cycle of over-desquamation, and we wonder why people have a lot of atopic dermatitis and barrier issues.
And also as you age as well, you see a lot more people with staph and strep skin infections or pathogenic strains. And for me, I was like, oh, right, okay. So just blanket term, get rid of the acne is backfiring. Because clearly what you've just been saying is that you need a balance with your commensals.
Right.
They talk to each other, they protect themselves from each other, but then balance out what happens with other species. And I think that is what's been missing.
That's absolutely right. The balance is where it's funny because I was on not a podcast, I guess it was a podcast, Honest Claire, and she just, I was on the second part the other day where people asked, I was on once and then they asked a bunch of questions and then I answered the questions on the second one. And one of the questions was somebody that actually, I was glad that they asked us because it means they're thinking, which they said they don't buy this story of using commensal microbes on the skin for health because there was a paper in animals that showed that when they were germ-free, they actually healed without scar faster than the people when you reintroduce the microbes. And that's a very good observation and question. But my answer was we're not mice, we're humans, so we can't equate, one for one. But to be fair, even we've talked about a long time ago how in gestation we don't cause scarring when we, and part of that's because of some of the absence or presence of large amounts of microbes. But the fact is, we don't live in a sterile world. So that's a moot question because unless you're going to live in a bubble, you're going to have microbes. And so it's not about whether you can have them or not. There's no question that you're going to have microbes. It's about the balance. Is it balanced with the microbes? Because part of the things that the microbes that are commensal, part of what they do is keep the ones that aren't supposed to be on there away. So, as you're walking across a room, you might get mold and stuff that falls on you. And part of the duty of the inherent engrafted microbiome of the skin is to keep those things from engrafting and becoming part of your microbiome. And so it's essential that if you live in a world that's not sterile, that you have something to inhabit the skin that is going to keep it from becoming infectious or something from becoming infectious. So
I have a question for Dr. Patel. So listening to Dr. Hitchcock, and you hear all of this, you're a clinician.
Yes.
Now you're supposed to take all of this and the research that we were just talking about and boil it down, and a patient walks in the door and you're expected to process all of this and treat that patient appropriately based on honoring what you've done in the past, but yet progressing into what the science is now telling you to do. How do you do it?
Very good question. So it's mindset for me.
Yeah.
So I'm very honest and very transparent. I'm underneath it all a scientist, I believe. And I think I always say to patients, we have new information that's coming out all the time, and we are now starting to understand that sometimes what we've been doing actually is counterproductive. We're starting to understand how our skin behaves and how that has a positive influence on our immune system. So when you introduce the word immune system, I think, right, okay, the eyes open up, right? And I will directly say, up until now, we have been skirting along the skin surface, exfoliating, replacing, but have we really understood the connection with what's underneath and how important that connection is? And then the holistic person comes out, and I'm like, ultimately, at the end of the day, to be healthy and to live well and to live longer, we have to respect the communication that's happening at the surface with what's happening internally. And there is this crossover. And now we have the technology, or at least solid evidence and a product that helps to respect that crosstalk without harming the skin.
Mm-hmm.
I often will just keep it as simple as that. Because it is, if you boil it down, without throwing all the jargon, without trying to overcomplicate it, people need to understand that we have to do better. And ultimately, health is the biggest thing out of all of this. And I think trying to piece together skin health is way more than just treatments, way more than just lapping on products, that what we do at the surface has a huge impact underneath. Mm-hmm. And what we eat and consume has a huge impact on the skin surface. So that tends to kind of simmer down the fear, I suppose. And it also sparks the curiosity.
Right.
But then I also throw in, I've been doing this now for 7 months, and hands up in the air. Like, I've not been on a topical, I haven't been on a topical Vit C and retinol now for 7 months. And my skin feels healthier and looks healthier than it's ever done. Yeah. So I think if you can embody the vision yourself, people are more likely to understand and believe you. And I think it's going to take a bit of time probably, but the whole microbe concept, it's breaking that vicious cycle of get rid of as much as possible and then lap on anything and everything to help soothe the damage that you've done. Right. So I try to be quite straightforward. I don't want to blow minds in that sense unless it's academic, but it is another level. For me, it's an upgrade. For me, it's one step closer to piecing everything together because the data's there. Well, and it makes sense.
I love that how you describe it, piecing it together.
But it is that.
That's why I like puzzles so much.
Right, okay.
Because science is a puzzle. Yeah. You know, it's like we cannot, as scientists and clinicians, we cannot assume that everything is going to be straightforward.
No.
Because it's not. Biology is not straight, it's complicated. And adjusting one parameter is going to lead to other parameters changing. And so in science, you know, when we're doing experiments, I just had this discussion with one of my junior scientists, is that they provide experiments, and I'll say, well, why do you think we got those wonky results? And they'll think about it, and it comes down to, did you limit your variables? Because in clinic, it's hard to limit your variables because you don't know what they're doing when they walk out your door.
Absolutely.
And so it's simple is better.
Right. And then often it will be coming back to you to go, did I make the wrong decision? Actually, it is this free-for-all, just do whatever you want. And people are not quite understanding that there is a process. But I think as we start to move more and more into this whole person era, and skin is part of that whole person era, we can't be shy of that. Right. And we have to embrace what's here because this is mind-blowing.
Let's talk about some of the mind-blowing stuff that is what I was getting to, as far as we talked about the AHA-HR receptor. But guess what? In our lab, I'm not going to give too much away because we do want to publish on this. And so look for a paper in the not too distant future. But what we've started to see is evidence of certain strains within the C. acnes defendens subspecies actually activate certain retinoid receptors, which is, to me, fascinating.
But it sounds to me in a very clever and smart way.
And a low level.
Well, there you are.
Because again, there's no reason why you have to have a high level. No. I mean, show me the science that shows that a higher level of retinoid receptors, alpha, beta, gamma, whatever one, show me the science that shows you're going to have better results consistently long-term for aging or whatever purpose if you do it that way. And I will say, I'm gonna go back to my premise of when the body's in symbiosis, you're producing low levels of all these things, which I believe, that's why the subtitle of my book with Dr. Day was How Properly Caring for Your Skin Biome Can Do More for Your Health and Beauty Than Any Ingredient on the Market. Because the fact is, while ingredients are great, these molecules are great molecules. It's all about the dosage. How do you choose for you and for me and for Angela? We're going to require different dosages because we have different diets, we have different lifestyles, we're different genders, we're different ages. And so why not just let your biology do what it's programmed to do? And so interestingly, when we did our initial clinical work and our bench science work on the BioJuve line, that was the first paper we put out there, we showed things like the activity of collagen and certain types of collagen, and then sirtuins, certain types of sirtuins. And we saw such interesting changes in the upregulation of genes. And then now we're just looking at not just the gene regulation, but the activation of receptors specifically called retinoid receptors. So these are things, this is the reason why we use retinoids, because it activates those receptors. And so when it gets down to it, all those things you listed out, what were they, Abigail? Do you remember?
So we said oil production, pigmentation, cell turnover, stratum corneum, shedding, fine lines and wrinkles, and blood flow.
All of those things, we got the AHR receptors that we're activating, we've got the retinoid receptors we're activating, we've got the antioxidants, we got what we didn't mention, which is the short-chain fatty acids that are tyrosinase inhibitors. And so you're basically now looking at all the things that we say retinoids are necessary to do. We're doing that already through the body's innate symbiotic balance of microbes. Now, does that mean that you can just have whatever microbiome? No, because like we said earlier, we're in a world where we've caused a dysbiosis. So you have to achieve, now do you have to use the BioJuve products? No, but you have to have symbiosis. How do you achieve symbiosis? That's what we're trying to achieve here, is give somebody an option where they can still do the pampering, I guess you would call it, or the regimen or the regime or whatever of taking care of skin with clean materials versus just never washing ever. So it allows you to still bathe and such, but then to try to bring your body back into symbiosis, try to use the best materials that we think are available today. And we're hoping that other companies will do the same.
As long as they have evidence.
As long as they have evidence. And that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, but it's important because that's the only way you're going to get people to believe.
That's true.
That's the only way I was going to believe.
Well, and evidence on different levels. For the scientist, for the clinician, evidence in the medical literature. For the consumer, what do they really want? They just want to know what Abigail just said, that my skin is softer and smoother, that I have less, fine lines and wrinkles, that I have, they want the benefits. They want to see that on the skin surface. So it's really, that's their evidence, is just get my skin. I always tell people, patients come into your practice not for a treatment, they come into your practice for a result.
Yes.
And it's up to the clinician to find the best way to get that result for that patient. But that's all the patient wants to see. They're trusting, especially in medical aesthetics, they're trusting that medical expertise of who they're seeing, whether that's the esthetician working under a medical director or the physician. They're trusting the medical expertise. They're looking for the result. The good news here, what I heard was both the science supports the idea that there could be something on the horizon that works as retinols do, but we also know the results also are consistent with what retinols have been shown to do.
Right. So one of the what do you call them, advisors during one of our initial meetings, he basically made a comment because we showed him all of the great results and the bench stuff. And he basically said, look, this all looks wonderful, but you know what? I'm going to stick with my retinoids because retinoids cause collagen to be produced. And therefore I'm going to stick with them. And basically that's what drove us to do the experiments to see what was produced inherently by these symbiotic microbes. And it showed that they do it as well. And the real crux of it is, and this is something in aesthetic medicine that I think is another topic for another day, but collagen, the body does not need endless amounts of collagen. You hear it all the time, produces new fresh collagen. You know, that irritates me because it's like, the thing is, the body needs only a certain amount of collagen for certain reasons. You don't keep them in a bank for a rainy day. You know, it's
need to overproduce it.
It's scar tissue. I mean, keloid scars are overproduction of collagen.
Yep.
You don't want things to overproduce collagen. So it's a little bit of this like romanticism of a molecule.
Yeah.
And just like we stopped using x-rays to treat acne, x-rays are still used in medicine, by the way. Will we stop using tretinoin? Or will we use it differently? Will we use microbes in the future to treat disease states? The thing is, we're not saying yes or no. We're saying there's evidence coming in that leads us to believe that we broke something that wasn't broken by some of our habits and our products and our way of life. And we're now going back to, can we still have our cake, but then eat it too, with the creation of innovations that allow us to keep the symbiosis, but live in a modern society with modern desires? And we'll leave it at that.
There you go.
Okay, and so I do want to thank our producers in the back. We have Dr. Abigail Watterson. How are you doing, Abigail?
Great.
She was the person that put together a lot of the papers and the outline for today. And we have Seti and Alan. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
All right. Great.
Good.
Yes. And so that's it. Well, if they want to find you on social media, if they want to stalk you, where can they go?
Just go to Instagram. I'm at Vedaskin Clinic. I'm an Instagrammer. That's my space, and you'll find me there.
You do some really fun ones too. Like that whole one was very like you were like a Hindu goddess, where you were like with the biojuve and.
Oh yeah.
I was like ethereal.
Well,
I felt like I should get in a lotus position or something.
Well, it would fit with the demeanor, I suppose.
No,
but,
I loved it. I loved it. And so I'm not as good at that, but if you want to follow me, you can follow me at dr.t.hitchcock. And Angela, where can they find you? All three of your posts.
Yes, Angela.
Don't be overwhelmed. At Angela Wilson McDonald.
Yeah. And so is there anywhere else? I guess that's the best way to contact you is your
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
For the professional
world.
world.
Or I would recommend you go to one of her many seminars that she goes to and find her there.
Yes.
She's all over the world.
Indeed.
All right. And so thank you for your time and attention today. We hope you gleaned something from this information. And until next time, goodbye for now.